The DEC says that they have never seen anything like this before. In all, 8 unmanned vessels got loose, and you can see the rusty anchor right here behind me. They do say, though, that this situation is stable. A lot has happened in the last few weeks, and taking it back even further, one of the things that ultimately got this case to trial were claims that women were branded. Several women say that they were told that they would be getting a small tattoo, but instead they were branded with this image. The government says that it contains a K and an R. After decades in business, months of investigation, and 6 weeks of testimony, we're one step closer to learning the fate of Keith Raniere. Closing arguments ended yesterday morning, and then that was followed by hours of instructions for jurors. Now it's all a waiting game. It's safe to say you've probably seen one of these boxes before. They're in a lot of pharmacies and police departments. The Schenectady Police Department actually introducing this one earlier this week. It's completely free, but also a safe way to get rid of old medications. This is actually a packet that they plan to bring to tonight's meeting. It includes photographs of what they say are the current conditions at the city's fire stations. Hundreds of Child Victims Act lawsuits have been filed against the Catholic Church, and that's expected to cost a significant amount of money. The question now is if any more dioceses will be filing for bankruptcy. So far, only Rochester has. Albany Police Chief Eric Hawkins tried to prepare himself before he took his oath 1 year ago.
You really don't get a true sense of what's happening until you really get here.
Take a second, hey.
But he knew about the recent problems. Last July was riddled with violence, 8 shootings, 2 fatal, as well as 2 fatal stabbings. Then just weeks into his tenure as the 10th Albany Police Chief in 30 years, 2 more homicides.
We have to deal with those incidents. We have to deal with the immediate aftermath, and then we also have to figure out what led to those.
Then fast forward to March. Body camera footage from an incident on 1st Street led to the arrest and suspension of Albany police officer Luke Deere. The video shows Deere push a man to the ground before repeatedly hitting him.
We have members of the community who fear that they can't trust the police, that the police are going to use excessive force in order to resolve issues. I learned during that period of time that words matter. You know, what I say in the way that I say things has an impact on how people perceive an incident.
That's a lesson that's followed him. By July, another violent summer was underway, and then a 3-year-old sleeping inside his daycare was struck by a stray bullet.
We have a child that's simply sleeping in a bed that was a victim here. And there could have been many others. You know, we had, at least 8 or 9 shots that were fired.
8 people were arrested on weapons charges. The oldest, 21 years old, the youngest, 15.
I think it was important that I, as the police chief, and there were other community leaders also, as well as folks in the community who expressed anger, expressed outrage at this. To have somebody do what those young men did was just simply unconscionable.
But less than 2 weeks later, violence continued. A 16-year-old was shot and a 15-year-old was charged with attempted murder. Even with programs and nonprofits trying to help, not all young people are listening.
There are some who are we're still missing those few. And so the critical question is, how do we touch those few who are susceptible to getting involved in these violent crimes? And it's going to take some work.
Throughout it all, the community has organized, planning meetings and scheduling more. Hawkins has been to many of those gatherings, continuing to listen and ask for suggestions.
What I see is people who say, you know what, let's meet and let's talk about this. Let's talk about some ways we can work toward a solution.
With the school year beginning, Hawkins credits the Albany School District with setting good examples for kids, but he says they need to reach the youth that's still at risk. That's something he plans to focus on. In Albany, Jaclyn Cangro, Spectrum News. On a relatively quiet road in an ordinary-looking building, volunteers are bustling inside. Because nothing about their work is quiet or ordinary.
The mail trucks were here this morning, picked up 400 boxes.
Bruce Duxbury has been volunteering with Operation Adopt a Soldier for several years.
They put together these stockings.
Working his way up to co-chair. And unlike many military organizations,
Ironically, our whole board of directors, we have no veterans.
but they certainly support them. Volunteers pack boxes with the necessities, things like toothbrushes, treats, and canned goods. Then they get shipped overseas to places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria.
We started with 7 soldiers, and we're up over 400 soldiers right now.
Cliff Seguin started Operation Adopt a Soldier after his son enlisted. He wanted homemade cookies and told his parents other soldiers wanted care packages as well.
I mean, can you imagine being over there in the desert, sandstorms, camel spiders, and then you get a package from home?
But home has different meanings for different people. That's something those at Operation Adopt a Soldier know all too well. A fire destroying the organization's home, a building on Route 50 in Wilton in August, and with it took 200 boxes that were ready to be shipped.
Again, we lost everything, so, at that point you're, okay, how are we going to go forward? We didn't even have a place to work out of.
That problem was quickly solved thanks to the generosity of a local resident loaning them a space, no questions asked.
You really don't realize what you have behind you until something like this happens, and then everybody comes out to show you their support for what you do.
Allowing them to send a piece of home just in time for the holidays.
That's what I'm proud of. I'm proud of getting joy to our soldiers, especially this time of the year. They need that.
In Wilton, Jaclyn Cangro, Spectrum News.
I chose to run in the opposite direction, but it still didn't stop him.
Ask anyone in the capital region and they'll tell you Keith Raniere ran what the government calls a sex cult. But 2 decades ago, that wasn't the man Tony Natale thought she was dating.
He was, very charismatic and listened. Keith, if he has any quality that has gotten him where he is today, he listens.
Before Nexium's downfall, Raniere ran Consumers Byline. The multi-level marketing company was a buying club, providing discounts for members.
He was a businessman, and those were the accolades that he presented to the world.
It would be several years before that business went south, tied up in litigation from shady business practices. Natale left Raniere in the early days of Nexium. She says she endured abuse from those closest to him. Everything from stealing her mail to a series of lawsuits spanning decades.
Once Nexium, Keith, his inner circle deem you to be an enemy, as anyone who has left knows, it's relentless.
That's before most people knew what Nexium was.
I'd gotten my job at Metroland, and I think I'd done 2 stories before the Nexium story landed on my desk.
Chet Hardin began investigating Nexium in 2006, and Natale became an important source. The two have worked together on and off ever since. They say one of the biggest hurdles is getting people to believe them.
People thought I was exaggerating. People thought I was, making things up even.
For a long time, I tried to explain to people, media, law enforcement, what was going on.
But now they know the truth. Raniere is waiting to be sentenced, found guilty on things like racketeering and sex trafficking. And Natale and Hardin are publishing a book.
The story runs parallel to my life and what happened with Keith over the last 20 plus years. But there's a lot of similarities in any coercive, controlled group.
It's been extremely satisfying to see this whole journey, and it's not done, obviously.
In Albany, Jaclyn Cangro, Spectrum News. It took advocates more than a decade to get the Child Victims Act passed. So for advocates like Brian Toll, it was a memorable day.
We were all up in the gallery watching it happen, and we were all looking at each other like, what do we do now?
Toll says for the past 6 months, he's been reaching out to other victims. He's also been working on his own civil lawsuit. Toll says he was repeatedly raped by his teacher during his senior year at Long Island Private School Chaminade.
And there were so many behaviors and beliefs and thought patterns that were associated with that secret that permeated my life.
Toll has been in recovery for 25 years, and in 2016, he sent 3 letters to school administrators. They never answered. And besides money, that's what Toll says he wants, answers to how this happened.
The school has not been forthcoming with any information. And so first and foremost, that's what I'm looking for.
But as the 1-year look-back window opens, the clock is starting to tick.
The anxiety is increasing.
Despite looking, Mary Ellen O'Loughlin says she hasn't been able to get a lawyer because the person that raped her when she was 12 and 13 years old was her stepfather, and he isn't part of a lucrative school or group.
I feel like, what about me? And what about the others? Of course, institutions are where the money's going to be. The individuals aren't.
O'Loughlin says besides wanting closure, this is the only way to know if there are already or could be in the future other victims.
My fear, based on education, is that there are others. There's never just one.
And while she says she wants a lawyer, she isn't going to let the 1-year window go to waste.
Oh, I will file a suit, and he will be held accountable because the law says I can.